difference of opinion leads to inquiry, and inquiry leads to truth. That's a quote by Thomas Jefferson. That's an idealistic notion that might not be your experience. Difference of opinion can sometimes lead to conflict, which can lead to failure. Have any of you ever been on a team that failed because of conflict? Not good. Nobody wants that. When you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that people typically avoid conflict and avoid confrontation. We can be so committed to avoiding conflict that we assume we understand the views of others when really we don't. We can sometimes just tune people out when they're talking about something that seems irrelevant or something that's boring to us. We may do that without even realizing it, and we may miss the most important aspect of what's being said. What if you had a tool that would help you turn differences of opinion into assets? Who could benefit from that? You think you could benefit? Okay, good. Because there is exactly such a tool for that, and that tool is perspective taking. There was a study that was done about diverse teams. That is, teams that have different opinions and different perspectives. What they discovered was that diverse teams, in fact, could perform better. However, this did not happen automatically. In this study, they had two groups of test subjects. The group of subjects where they instructed the teams to take each other's perspectives, that's the set of teams that performed better. Perspective taking means taking your fellow team members' perspectives. By using perspective taking, you can boost your team's performance. Today I'm going to talk about 3 different approaches to perspective taking. There's a lot of different methods for it, but today I'm going to talk about 3. I'm going to talk about reconciling inaccurate stories. Then I'm going to talk about empathetic listening, and finally model building. Okay, let's get started. This first method of perspective taking is all about reconciling inaccurate stories. So what am I talking about? Well, sometimes when you don't really know what people are all about, you don't really understand them, you make up stories to explain it. It's almost like gossip or something. Think about the Eastern world versus the Western world. When I went to school to do my graduate studies at USIU, an international university, I met people from all over the world, from Yemen, from Egypt, from Africa, from Switzerland, from Japan, from everywhere, all different places. We all ate together in the cafeteria. What I learned was that these people were in many, many ways just like me. A lot of the rumors that I had heard about different nationalities simply were not true. This example that I'm going to give you today is about a company or a division of Johnson & Johnson Vision Care called Vistakon. They ran into a problem because they wanted to embark on a whole new, very bold, ambitious strategy. They wanted to be able to bring a lot more products to market than they were currently able to do this. To do. So what they had to do was they looked into it and they discovered that their R&D department and the manufacturing department really only had a transactional arm's length relationship. They really did not interact very much. This was going to be a problem if they were going to launch this new strategy. These two groups needed to be able to work together as a team. They looked into it and they discovered that they had even made up stories about each other. The R&D group in Jacksonville, Florida believed that the Irish manufacturing people just switched the manufacturing equipment around on a whim. On the other hand, the Irish manufacturing plant, the people over there, thought that R&D people in Jacksonville, Florida were kind of like dictators, just dictating to them to switch things around and do things their way. They didn't like it. The company realized they were going to have to do something if they were going to be able to move this strategy forward. So they brought them all together in the same room for a discussion. At first what happened was that accusations were just flying all around the room. And what came to light and came out into the open was a lot of misunderstanding. Then eventually these two groups started to see each other as people. And they started to understand what was behind their actions. Eventually what happened was that these stories they had made up about each other just seemed kind of superficial. Going forward, R&D in Jacksonville, Florida, learned to really appreciate the fact that the manufacturing department wanted to really be able to keep the costs down. They wanted to deliver high quality products. And also the manufacturing learned to appreciate that R&D wanted innovation and speed, that it was important. They learned to appreciate each other's different objectives. The reason they were able to do this was because they were able to dispel these inaccurate stories, and going forward they were able to achieve the goals of both groups. Even though they had different goals, they understood each other and they could work together and accomplish this new strategy, which they did. In fact, they were able to launch a whole new contact lens line called One Day AccuView. They were able to triple their rate of production because of this. It's because of dispelling these inaccurate stories. My second example is all about empathetic listening. Have you ever resolved an agreement, a disagreement, because of empathetic listening? If so, then you understand that what you had to do is you had to get to a point where you understood what the other person, where they were coming from, and you had to be able to address and make amends, account for their perspective in what you were doing. But you couldn't do that unless you listened first. And in this example that I'm going to give you, that's exactly what happened. Listening made all the difference. This happened at Champion International Paper. That's a company that produces paper products. In the 1980s, the CEO, Andrew Siegler, wanted to transform the company. He had some very bold ideas about this. His first project was to create a state-of-the-art mill in Quinnesec, Michigan. He was planning to put in this mill very huge, the biggest machines that were available, great machines. He thought that he could make this work using teamwork, so he put teams together to work in the mills. At this time, this was a very pioneering idea. It was completely unproven. No one had proven you could run a mill using teams, but he did. It was very successful. This encouraged him, and then he wanted to transform the company even more. He wanted his top team of 8, the management team, to convert to a team system. He got all his top management people together, and they started to talk to each other and try to work on this. It was very tedious at first, but then eventually they started to understand each other better, to understand how each other thought and felt. Many of these people had worked together for years, but they really did not understand each other. There was one team member that realized that a lot of his colleagues had really great ideas and recommendations that he had just been ignoring because he hadn't really been listening to them. And he realized that the company had really missed out because of this. When they started this process of turning this group into a team, there was a lower level task force at the company that was working on coming out with a new reward system that would reward collective accomplishments. Well, that's a very worthwhile objective. The problem is, this top group of 8 did not agree with their recommendations. It turned out this was the very first test as to whether this top group really could work together as a team or not. The thing they did is that they did not accept that task force recommendations. They just dismissed it, and they went instead and worked together to create a reward system that really would make sense for them. They were able to take into account every single top member, their goals, and their willingness to take risks. And they were able to construct a reward system to reward collective accomplishments that really was meaningful for them. They were able to do this because of empathetic listening. Finally, this last example is about model building. Why is model building effective when it comes to perspective taking? The reason is because if you build a model and your colleague comes along and sees that model and does not agree with it, then that colleague can build a brand new model or make adjustments in your model. It's right there in front of you. It kind of forces you to get into agreement. A really great example of using model building for perspective taking happened when Watson and Crick came out with the structure for DNA. Francis Crick was a very brilliant mathematician. James Watson was a molecular biologist. In 1953, they came out with the helix structure for DNA. It was a double helix. They figured this out. What's really fascinating about this is how they did it. They did not do any new experiments or collect any new data. Instead, they looked at other people's data. Then what they did is they constructed models. These models were made out of metal pieces, just little metal pieces. The beauty of this approach is that they could dispel each other's erroneous hypotheses. They could look right at it and see if it was wrong. Another thing you should make note of is by using this model building process, this was a communication tool for them as well as the end product. That's very fascinating, I think. Finally, Watson was able to figure out where the cross pieces went, the bases, and that's when they had it. They knew they had it. The thing is that they had to be able to come out with a structure that would satisfy the known scientific data. They were able to, it worked in terms of the X-ray data, and it worked in terms of the laws of stereochemistry. They succeeded. It made sense. Teams can boost their performance when they take advantage of perspective taking. Perspective taking happens when each team member can put forth their own perspective and their own knowledge and get that all into the mix of what they're doing. Today I talked about 3 versions of perspective taking, or 3 techniques. Number 1, reconcile and eliminate inaccurate stories. Number 2, engage in empathetic listening. And number 3, use model building to create shared understanding. When you use perspective taking in your teamwork, you'll be able to turn differences of opinion into productivity that you never before dreamed was possible.